I was born into a kind of a non-religious family as a child, and I fell in love with science at a very early age. And I thought that all the mysteries of life, all the really meaningful
Mm,
things that one could discover, could be discovered with science. So I believed in the Darwinian way of understanding man and physics and chemistry and all those things. And I majored in biochemistry in college, and I wanted to be a doctor, and I really wanted to be a neurosurgeon because I wanted to understand the brain and the mind, because I thought that I would understand on a deep level who we are and what we are
mm,
if I knew all the science there was to know about the brain. So I graduated from medical school. I trained in neurosurgery and graduated from my residency in 1991 and went out and practiced as a neurosurgeon. And a number of things happened to me as a neurosurgeon and as a husband and a father that changed the way I look at the world. And As a neurosurgeon, I began finding patients who had large parts of their brains missing. A good example is a little girl who was born with only about half her brain.
mm.
And I counseled her family that this didn't look good. I couldn't be sure how she would do, but it didn't look encouraging. And as she grew up, I followed her, and she was normal at every stage of development. In fact, rather bright.
Wow.
She's now in her mid 20s and a vibrant, normal young woman. Has a great job. She's her mother says she's too smart for her own good, and she has half a brain. I have a number of other patients with major parts of their brains missing who
Mm,
are really okay, who are really fine, and that didn't fit any of the neuroanatomy textbooks that I read in medical school. There were strange things going on there. The whole thing kind of came to a head when I was operating many years ago on a woman who had a brain tumor in her left frontal lobe. And
mm,
we do awake brain surgery at times. And what awake brain surgery means is that um, the patient is given a local anesthetic like Novocaine, so they don't feel pain. The brain itself has no sensation of pain, so it's just like cutting your hair. You don't feel anything. And we can stimulate the surface of the brain and get a map of the critical parts of the brain. So, for example, if I'm removing a tumor, I can find out what parts I have to protect and what parts I can safely remove to get the tumor out. So it makes the operation safer. So she was awake, and I was taking out the tumor and taking out much of the left frontal lobe of her brain, and we were having a conversation. And it was a perfectly normal conversation. It's the same kind of conversation you and I are having here right now, as her big part of her brain is coming out. And it didn't seem to make any difference in her conversation. Fortunately, that was the whole point of the
yeah.
surgery, was to keep her healthy. And after that operation, I thought, my goodness gracious, we don't understand what the brain does. There's
Mm,
something deeper here, because none of my textbooks said you could take out most of the left frontal lobe and have a person be perfectly normal. Um, so at around the same time, I had a religious conversion, one might say, um, and it was related intellectually to some of my doubts about Darwinism. I began reading more deeply about the Darwinian explanation for how we became human, and it struck me as pretty weak science. I thought it was pretty bad science. I didn't look at it at that point from a religious standpoint. I just thought of all the scientific disciplines I knew, this is the one that I think was the least rigorous.
mm,
Um, but I have four kids, and when my youngest son was born, the first couple months of life, he wasn't making eye contact, and he wasn't smiling, and he wasn't behaving as if he understood my wife and I to be people. We were like objects to him,
mm,
and I became frightened that he was autistic. And autism has always terrified me. The idea that you have a child who you love and want to connect with, and they don't even know you exist. You're just like a piece of furniture to them. So I was quite frightened of it. We took him to some neurologists, and they said it's too young. He's just a few months old. You really can't be sure. So by the time he was about 6 months old, he still wasn't making eye contact and wasn't really interacting with us. And I was seeing a consult, a patient at an outside hospital. It was a Catholic hospital, and I was at a point where I was emotionally really, really distraught by this. I was thinking, I'm never going to love my son. I'm never going to have my son love me. He's never going to know me.
Mm.
So after I saw the consult, it was late at night. There was a chapel in the hospital, so I stopped by the chapel, and I went into the chapel, and I got down in front of the altar and prayed. And I said, God, I don't know if you exist. I don't make praying a habit, but if you do exist, could you take this away from me, please? This is something I can't deal with. I can't have my son be autistic and not know me. And I heard a voice, only time in my life I've ever heard a voice, and it was very clear, and it wasn't me saying it. And the voice said, but that's what you're doing to me.
Whew.
So I said, I kind of collapsed, and I said, okay, I won't do it to you anymore. I won't be autistic to you. And but please make my son not autistic to me. So went home, and a few days later was his 6-month birthday, and he was perfectly normal. He's perfectly
Mm.
fine. He's currently a law student and anything but autistic. So um, I that complemented in some sense my discoveries as a surgeon and in neuroscience, that there's a lot more to man than just meat.
Mm.
That we do have souls. That there's a spiritual aspect to us. And I converted to Christianity. Got baptized. Many people in my family also got baptized. Since I had spent several decades of my life as an atheist and a materialist, I kind of feel like I have a debt to repay.
Mm.
Wouldn't call it vengeance, but
Mm.
I want to convey to people that atheism and materialism are wrong,
Mm.
and that God exists and that He's real, and that we really do have souls. Um, so I began looking more deeply into the neuroscience of the brain and the soul, to try to explain why I had seen these strange things with people with parts of their brains missing who are perfectly normal, that I can take out part of a woman's frontal lobe as I'm talking to her, and it doesn't change her. And I found that there were other neurosurgeons and other scientists who really had seen the same kind of thing, that I
Mm.
wasn't the first person to notice this. Um, the greatest scientist in the neurosurgical profession was a guy named Wilder Penfield,
Mm.
um, who worked back in the mid 20th century in Montreal, and he pioneered the surgery of epilepsy. And one of his most common operations was awake brain surgery, the sort of thing that I had done with the woman with the tumor. And he did about 1,100 patients with awake brain surgery. So no one's ever come anywhere near
Yeah.
those kind of numbers. Awake brain surgery is still done today, but if you do a few hundred in your life, it's a large volume.
Mm.
So Penfield really was responsible for a lot of the mapping of the brain that we know about today.
Mm.
Because he operated on all these over 1,000 people and mapped all kinds of areas of their brain. And he would map them by stimulating with a little electrical probe the surface of the brain while they were awake. And he would ask them what they felt or what they saw, or see if they moved. And he found peculiar things, and that really surprised him, because had started out as a materialist just like I had. He found that when he would stimulate the brain, and he must have stimulated the brain at least 1,000,000 times in these
Oh my
1,100
goodness.
patients. Well, if you count out, say, 2 stimulations a minute, and the operations last about 8 hours, I actually did the math.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's over 1,000,000
Okay.
stimulations. He could only stimulate 4 things from the brain. He could make the person move. He could stimulate the motor area, and they'd raise their arm. He could make them have a perception, let's see a flash of light, or smell something, or hear something. He could make them have an emotion. There are parts of the brain where if you stimulate it, you can get a powerful emotion. You can get fear or joy. There's a part of the brain that makes you laugh, that if you stimulate that, you feel like everything's funny. Um, and he could stimulate memories. He could stimulate certain parts of the temporal lobe, and you'd have a memory of your mother's face, or a memory of a conversation that you'd had years before. But those were the only things he could stimulate. And what he left out is everything we're doing right now. He couldn't stimulate abstract thought. He couldn't stimulate the ability to contemplate philosophy or to think about the meaning of life. He couldn't stimulate mathematics. Nowhere in the brain could he stimulate someone to say, 1 + 1 is 2.